Hey, everybody. Startup Security Weekly, episode number 36. And although I might look a little like Paul's off today. So it's just me. On our program, we've got Roger Courville, the Michael Jordan of virtual presentation, here to talk to us about some tips and some lessons he's learned in startup land, as well as our usual rundown of the news and stories. And of course, we're going to talk about Jeff Bezos' annual letter, along with some movement this week in things like Cyber GRX and check recipient and a new CEO at McAfee. So stay tuned. Episode 36 is about to get started.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show about security startups, how to secure your startup, and advice for security startups. It's Startup Security Weekly.
I need it from the top.
Brought to you by Gain control of cyber risk with Tenable.io, the first vulnerability management platform built for today's elastic assets like cloud, containers, and web apps. Discover a fresh, asset-based approach that prioritizes vulnerabilities while seamlessly integrating into your environment. And improve ROI with the first elastic licensing approach based on assets, not IP addresses. Tenable.io delivers the data and context you need to secure your elastic attack surface. Start your free Tenable.io trial today by visiting Tenable.io.
So, in an odd twist of fate, it's the beach bum holding it down this week as our veritable workhorse. He's chilling with the kids or something. Maybe he's on a beach. I don't know. Wherever Paul is, he's there. Before we jump into it, itpro.tv, their courses now include ITIL, Managing the Lifecycle, and Microsoft Hello for Business. Premium annual memberships include all the video content as well as access to virtual labs and Q&A forums. Now, you'd normally pay $87.50 a month or $857 per year, but as we've been telling you about, we've got a special offer for our listeners and our viewers. For a limited time, you get 50% off a monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. We get a lot of great feedback about this, so I hope you'll check that out and tell them you heard about it from us. And I'll grab you that code, so stick around for the next segment because I don't remember it offhand, but I'll grab you the code, and it's SS50. Which actually totally makes sense now that I heard it. SS50. If I can remember it, you can remember it, and that'll work out great. So as we like to do in this program, right, just as a reminder, or maybe this is your first time watching it, so we look at the startup world, and we're looking at startups, and we're looking at security. So this gives us a chance to look at the business of security. This gives us a chance to look at the security of business. And we have from time to time brought on people who join us, and they get to talk about the investment side and the money side. There's a lot of stuff happening right now in private equity and even M&A, mergers and acquisitions, on the Fortune 500 side. We're going to start looking at more of that. We get to talk to people that are founders in startup land and people that have had that experience. We talk from time to time to the buyers. And one of the things that you've asked for, and that's been a lot of fun for us, is we also bring in some experts that almost always have startup experience. But these are the people that are going to elevate your performance. And that's today. So I'm really excited that Roger Courville decided to join us and that he was available for it. Now, look, Roger's a friend, and I'm lucky to call him a friend. I'm honored to know him. The first time I got introduced to Roger Courville, I was a member of the National Speakers Association, and they were doing some sort of a webinar on how to present virtually. And, of course, they had Roger. And so here's Roger. Roger's got a book. It's this slick camera setup. I mean, way ahead of everything else. And it was one of the few times that I sat there listening to somebody else, and I just took note after note after note. And here we are, a decade later, and we're friends, and we talk to each other regularly. And I said, Roger, you've got to join us. And of course, he's known as the Michael Jordan of virtual presentation. But to be fair, he's also done TEDx talks. I mean, Roger's awesome. So I guess without going any further on that, and I don't want to set the bar too high for you, my friend. Welcome to Startup Security Weekly, and today we're going to talk about presentation skills.
Yeah, bring
among
that
other
bar
things.
down. That and
Yeah.
$4 will get you a triple Fufiato at Starbucks. And if you order before
Yeah.
midnight, you'll get the Ginzu knives absolutely
Yeah,
free.
it's now that I've done that too. It was always like I'd go teach a class and they'd be like, "Michael's the best instructor you'll ever have." Okay, have a good week, everybody. It's like, wow, that's a great way to start. But I mean, the thing though that's interesting is, so let's talk about this because virtual presentation. A lot of people have said, "Oh, I've done webinars before. I've used that stuff." It's still an interesting art form for people. And I think that in a startup today, you need to know how to communicate with people. So what I'm kind of curious with is, how did you get started on virtual presentations? And how did you develop the expertise and that recognition that that's what you do?
Yeah, well, entirely by accident. Number one, I just took a job. 1999, we were still happy if people had 56K modems because there were still plenty of 28.6 modems out there. I won't tell you that my first modem was a 1200 baud something. But what I figured out at that time, IBM was our biggest client. They were a real early adopter in the space, and we were doing webinars and webcasts for the AS400 division back then. And what I figured out was two things. One, there was a very real business value proposition, right? So that was .com boom, .com total bust. But there was a very real business value proposition because it involved communication, collaboration, and a way to add something to the mix of how you get business done. And so I just figured out where it fit uniquely. I started reading every book that I could find on seminars and how to produce great seminars and that kind of thing. All of that was physical, of course, so I couldn't read half the book that told you how to stand at the lectern. But here we are, September will be 18 years.
Wow. All right. So it's a new space, and we got to hope. One of the things I've noticed, one of the things I've always enjoyed about our conversations is at times you've used the title Chief Aha Guy. So let's plan that. What was one of your first big ahas, switching from being able to present seminar style, standing at the lectern versus walking around? Because early on, we didn't have the option of video like we have today. It was, I could present to you my slides, or maybe I could present to you some prepared stuff or what have you. What was one of the first ahas that you realized when we looked at virtual presentation versus being physically with somebody in the same space?
Slight correction, we did have video back then.
Did we?
But it ran through Real Player, and there was 60 to 90 seconds of latency, and it was crap. So, so that's why nobody really used video. If what you wanted was a synchronous experience, right? So, the technologies have converged, right? But back then there was a very big difference between streaming, which is very much a broadcast kind of model, and conferencing, which was very synchronous, right? Which is how we don't get on a conference call and think. And put up with any latency. Well, fast forward a little bit. I think one of the things that I think that is still interesting, and I'm going to appeal to the theater of your mind here, since I'm not standing at a whiteboard. But to me, one of the things that I did early on was to study the behavior of human attention and relative to media types. And one of the things that I did was to parse communication behavior much the same way a marketer might segment a list, because optimization drives valuation. So in three broad strokes, there's real-time, in-person, which would be us being in the same room. There's asynchronous, not real-time, and at a distance, which would be like watching a YouTube video or frankly the recording of this if you're going to grab this off iTunes. And then in the middle is real time but at a distance, which for a century was the telephone, right? And then here comes early peer-to-peer based conferencing, and then ultimately what we know today with pick your favorite, go to Meeting or WebEx or whatever you want to use. And so it is in that center spot that we have unique opportunities to connect and communicate in a way that we don't have with asynchronous media, right? And in fact, if there's any big beef that I have, it's that oftentimes people's webinars, webcasts, virtual classes, whatever you want to call them, are still talk at you experiences instead of talk with you experiences. And here is why I think that's something to be poignantly aware of if you're in the business of thinking about value. Because if your webinars or webcasts, whatever you call them, our talk at you experience is blah 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 blah, and for 45 minutes later we take some Q&A at the end, which is something we would never do in an in-person seminar unless you're just purely the keynoter. The reason is because we ask a higher psychosocial price for somebody to show up at a live event at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday than to post the video where they can access it at any time. And if you parse the behavior and the communication and the opportunity for you to have a dialogue or connect in ways that you can't do with asynchronous media, there's your opportunity to drive optimization, which is going to drive value for your end users, whoever that happens to be, whether you're, pitching an investor or driving leads, whatever that happens to be. So anyway, I get a little geeky about it, and crazy enough, I still love it 18 years later.
And that's what I love about our conversations. So what kind of effort does it take? All right, so this is one of the things that I see a lot when I help people. They say, well, I opened up PowerPoint and I threw a bunch of stuff on it, and to be blunt, kind of looks like they just threw up on PowerPoint. And I see a lot of people now say, oh, well, it's virtual presentation. I'll do the same thing. Now, you just touched on that. That's our opportunity to be synchronous, to have conversations, to engage people. How do you help people realize that the medium is a little bit different? And so, first of all, that strategy doesn't work in any situation. But broader than that, to be able to take advantage of what you just talked about, and engage with somebody and have real conversations without having to be face to face. What are some basic things that somebody listening to this right now can take advantage of so they have better sales calls and better support calls and better team meetings? There are a couple of things people overlook that would make a big difference in how we use these virtual tools.
Yeah. Two things come to mind based on what you just said. One was the preparation, right? I mean, if you just stand up and give an in-person presentation and you haven't prepared and your PowerPoint looks like the south end of a northbound horse, well, moving that online just means you suck louder and faster and farther, right? So the first is you got to get ready one way or the other. The second, grab a pen. I'm going to give you a little simple 3-step process, and I'll repeat it. Analyze, map and adapt, discover. Analyze, map and adapt, and discover. So here's what I do, whether it's one-on-one coaching or I'm working with a team of instructional designers at Fortune 500 company, and I do all of the above. The first is I quite literally help someone analyze, parse every behavior that they have in an in-person presentation. So unless it's a pure keynote where you're standing on stage and they may or may not see some slides, most everyone has some form of interaction, handouts, expectation of Q&A, and all of that kind of thing. And then we say, how do we adapt that or map it to a set of tools that you have, which could be, again, go to meeting, go to webinar, go to training. There are 160 vendors in the conferencing space, so don't be surprised if you've only heard of 5 of them and are surprised that there's 160. I'm sure it's the same in the security space. Here's the third and most critical step. Once we have taken those in-person behaviors and we begin to map them, a couple things become true. The first thing is people have a sense of loss. Number one question that I ever get is, how do you engage an audience that you can't see? And that's because before we discover what's new or better or different about communicating through a different medium, we experience this sense of loss. Socially, people don't like change, right? They notice what they lose before they notice what they gain. In communication theory, it's called the medium theory or communication theory of communication. And that's that the medium transforms the sending and receiving of signal. Well, duh, that's obvious if I write a story in a book and then I want to adapt that story to a movie. It's less obvious when I stand up with PowerPoint offline and then I move me and my PowerPoint on. Right? But here's a question, right? So I say, hey, if somebody was sitting in your audience in the front row and they raised their hands, would you ignore them to ask a question? Would you ignore them for 40 minutes? Well, if we would do that in an in-person seminar, why the heck would we do that in a virtual seminar? Because we see bad behavior modeled over and over. It's like learning to play golf with Uncle Joe, and Uncle Joe's a hack. And so what I learned to do is hack too. And I hate to say it, but sometimes the conferencing companies themselves are the poorest repeaters of said bad practice. So anyway, so that's the skill part. Analyze, map and adapt, and then discover what you can do new or uniquely or different in the virtual environment. And ultimately, here's where you come back to. It's not a right or a wrong. It's not better or worse. It's different. There's a time to use video. There's a time not to use video. There's a time just to have a conference call instead of firing up WebEx. But the point is, when you think about optimizing to that specific medium, you'll figure out that it's a killer addition that will create value in your business. And if you are missing out on the idea of, of how conferencing can create value for you beyond just have a team meeting, support call, or do a webinar, I mean, give me a call. I will not send you an invoice to spend 10 minutes tweaking with your brain.
Yeah. And I'm glad for that, because otherwise I'd have a really long bill of all of the advice that you give me. So, all right. So when we look at tools, then there's a lot, and you named obviously some of the big players in the market space, and then I was a little surprised to learn there's 160. All right. So I'm a startup today, and I'm trying to think about everything all at the same time. And you're telling me I have a tool now that I can use for more than what I thought I could use it for. What does somebody need to think about then? How do we parse through the noise of 160 different vendors to figure out what works for us?
Actually, you know what? If I'm walking through somebody creating an RFP, I actually walk through a very similar thing like that analyze, map, adapt that we just did. Here's why. I start, it's a little less theoretical to just start with what is known. Hey, tell me what you do now. What's working for you now? What's not working for you now? Now let's figure out where this fits in the process. So I think about it behaviorally and from a business case perspective first, not which technology should I use first, right? I get that question a lot. Hey, what's the best conferencing platform out there? And I'm like, yes. Right? That's kind of like getting the question that says, what's the best car? Well, I don't know. Are you hauling children, or are you hauling gravel? Because a pickup and a minivan will both do. But the elegance of one emerges relative to the other. If you don't know what you're looking for, let me give you a couple basic ways to think about it. Of those 160 vendors, the vast majority, all of them, have a meeting-oriented platform. So most vendors have some different configurations of the tools based on the behavioral type of thing that you're trying to do. We have meetings mostly. Most all of them are meeting platforms. But to use our friends at LogMeIn as an example, right? GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar. One is more 7 of us collaborating in a team meeting kind of a scenario, and one's more of that pre-register, a few of us on the stage with 5 or 5,000 people in the audience kind of scenario. Very different from a communication perspective. And so if it's a function of trying to go find what you want, the first thing is, do you know what you want? And I don't start with anything but a business case and then go look at the vendors. And if you don't know what you want, try one. I mean, crap, you can get a professional tool for $50 a month now. That's nothing, right? So, and you can there's plenty of free stuff which acts accordingly, but you know what I mean. It's not expensive. And by the way, here's your top market leaders, right? Microsoft, Skype for Business, Adobe Connect. LogMeIn, GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, WebEx, Meeting Center, Event Center. They're sweet. You're talking 80% of the market in those 4 vendors. Now, if there is something that I think is going to be revolutionary in the next number of years, it's what Microsoft is doing with Skype for Business. So Skype for Business, if you don't know, is very different than the consumer Skype, right? Totally different app. Totally part of Office 365. And, if they've got, 1.5 billion instances of Office in the world, and they've got 300 million users of Skype, what's one of Microsoft's huge initiatives? It's to move people to the cloud. Yep. And Skype for Business plugs in there in a way that I think you're going to see some amazing things out of. It's a crappy webinar platform. It's an awesome meeting platform if you want to integrate it into whatever. You can see over my shoulder right there. We switched from Slack to Teams, and the nature of just how they integrate it with everything is actually pretty cool. Are they ahead of the curve? No, I'd say they're behind the curve. But they're Microsoft. They can wait it out 10 years, and they're doing some cool stuff.
You pointed out something interesting, and I was going to ask your opinion, and you already opened it up. We saw that Microsoft recently announced the Teams, and it was a direct shot at Slack, because they looked at it and they said, look, you're already paying for our stuff. Hey, congratulations, now you have more stuff, which is also what Google's doing. And I got to tell you, on that front, Google tried the Hangouts experiment and the Hangouts on Air, and they can't seem to figure out what they're doing, but they're also exceptionally well capitalized. I get the sense they'll figure it out. So, and of the names you named, right? So Adobe, okay, so they're a giant. in LogMeIn, Citrix, whatever, that's owned by Cisco. Rumor is they're looking maybe to divest it, but they're owned by a giant. Microsoft is a giant. So is that the way this goes? I mean, is a lot of the stuff that we look at now in terms of our ability to collaborate virtually, to present virtually, to have this sort of telepresence, does this become a feature set of bigger things? Is that the trend that we're pushing toward?
You totally nailed it. I just did a competitive analysis for a vendor because one of the things I do, I say on the side, even though I'm chief content officer here at EventBuilder, I do some consulting, right? So because I've been in the industry so long, it was a competitive analysis for one of the big vendors. And here's one of the challenges. I'll put Google in a separate bucket. 94% of Google's revenue is still advertising. So, for them, it's all about time on site, right? Mm-hmm. Google Hangouts was never a great tool. I think people learned to futz with it, but it was never really a serious contender, except that it's Google. It's free and it's time on site, right? Because Google's in the behavioral analysis business. Everybody else has largely been in the conferencing business, and you're right. Conferencing or synchronous transport, I call it transport, right? The synchronous connection that we're on right now is a commodity, total commodity, right? You can fire up video conferencing, so to speak, out of Facebook, Slack, HipChat, right? All that kind of stuff is it's functionally free. It's the additional tools that go around it where they're creating value. Here is the trend that I think is going to rock people's world, and why I think Microsoft and Cisco in particular are, and now LogMeIn with the acquisition of GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, and stuff from Citrix. I think that's why there's a reason why they're positioned to do something very interesting, because I believe that we have, in the past, we went from conferencing down, and Microsoft's taking that, and Cisco is as well, from the phone call up. So, example in our space, LogMeIn's $1 billion company, right? And that's GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, Join.me, and then 9 or 10 various products for IT people, right? Password management, identity management, those kinds of things. But they're a $1 billion company. Microsoft's a $100 billion company. So if you're a $100 billion company, where are you going to go make a dent in the world? It's not by going and beating LogMeIn for a few $100 million worth of business out of GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar. It's the telephone. The top 10 telcos in the world have revenues that are $50 to $100 billion. Cisco's the same way. Cisco's a $50 billion company. So where are they going to go make a dent? It's not in the conferencing space. It's at this whole infrastructure telco level, and they're going to go head to head with China Telecom and AT&T. They're not worried about, I don't think, GoToMeeting. Back to startup people, though. What does that mean for us, right? WebRTC or a variety of these things, I think, give us a great opportunity to maybe think about how it's like using Skype today. Skype's free, but it's part of an ecosystem that Startup Security Weekly is using to accomplish a project. It's beautiful. And I think there's an opportunity there in a lot of different ways where it might not be the main thing that you're doing. It becomes something, to your point, that is a feature. I'm not on Facebook to use video conferencing, but now I can do it.
So that's interesting then. And I just maybe saw a connection, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. So you're now Chief Content Officer at EventBuilder. And we've not talked in depth about that, but you guys are building stuff using Skype for Business, or you're building around that, right?
Yeah. What we've got is kind of unique in the sense that, Skype for Business is a telephone replacement, right? I mean, you can go in to an organization and entirely rip out the entirety of the plain old telephone system, and everything's in the cloud with Skype for Business all integrated to your desktop, Windows 10, and everything, right? That's their big play. So you can't use Skype for Business in the traditional, I want a webinar sense, throw up a registration page, drive people there, they register, then they get reminder emails, and then they come to your webinar. And, Skype for Business doesn't do that. So we built a platform that kind of surrounds it, that adds registration, that will scrape and screen, or scrape and stream. Standard configuration with Skype for Business goes up to 250 people. Now in the cloud, we can go to as many thousands as you want, because that's just a function of provisioning more juice in the cloud. And then reporting, management, archive, hosting, all of those kinds of things that you'd want in an enterprise communications thing around webinars or virtual classes. So it's actually a beautiful, beautiful thing. And as you might imagine, Microsoft's one of our biggest customers because we've got something they don't.
Well, and that's kind of interesting. So what happens then is that as this technology, and this has a play for any of the startups as they're looking at it, but so what we're talking about is something that was really unique 15, 16, 17, 18 years ago and hard. So we needed visionaries that looked at the things we could do. And as you pointed out, right, there's no lack of ways to have a video engagement with somebody else, which is fascinating, looking how fast that's grown. But then as it becomes a commodity, the companies are saying, look, we'll provide it, knock yourselves out. They're not always going to add these features into it. So that gives way then for startups to look at something that's commoditized or becoming commoditized and say, let me help you add value on top of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maturing markets always shift kind of the center of gravity, right? So, when I left Microsoft, I and a few guys got some angel funding, started a company that we ultimately sold to the largest conferencing company in America, or in North America. But along the way, one of the things that we saw was the opportunity to, when I divested that, I and one of my business partners went, well, what's next? And every maturing market spawns sub-markets, right? Sometimes it's content and education, which is kind of the direction that I went. Sometimes that's pro services or ancillary technologies. And so we're seeing that now in the real-time communication space where, you know what, if you want to hold a web conference and have a video-based meeting with some basic collaboration tools, you can do that for free or very cheap, right? But the places that people are creating value are moving to the periphery in other places, right? So do we think of video conferencing as we don't think of Slack as a video conferencing player. What did they do? They just introduced it because sometimes you need that synchronous communication in addition to your asynchronous collaboration.
All right, so you mentioned you were previously part of a startup that went from angel to exit. What'd you learn? Because a lot of people watching this and they think about it, the way you just described it too, right? With a big company, had an idea, so stepped out. So give us some of that, because I know a lot of our listeners, when they write into us and they say, hey, well, I've got my gig right now and I'm gaining insight, I'm gaining knowledge, I'm figuring things out, but one day I think I might break out and do my own thing. So first of all, what would you say? If somebody just said that to you, without any of the context, would you be like, absolutely do it? Or would you be like, dude, let's sit down and have a chat first. Let me tell you what it's like. Either way, what was it like for you going from that, leaving the corporate job and getting that angel investment and getting going all the way through the exit? What are some of the memories and the highlights you have of that?
It was quite a rush, and I'll tell you this, despite the fact, this would be the very first question, very first answer I would give. I don't care how long you think it's going to take, it's going to take longer. Yeah. Which may or may not be true, right? It's kind of like the same with money, right? How much money do you need? More. I think the biggest problem for all of us, especially if we're startups, entrepreneurs. I've done multiple startups. The part of the challenge is too much opportunity. Can you figure out where you can get a toehold and hang on? And until you kind of cross that chasm, so to speak, because I think one of the biggest challenges, and we ran into this, right? Famous story where we're part of the way into building the platform that we were building at the time, and we walked into. I was part owner and part of the leadership team, but we walked in at one point, and the CEO said, "Hey, we did this really awesome big deal with Bell Canada, and oh, by the way, we need to localize in French Canadian." French Canadian. Well, not only had we, was localization on the roadmap, and, obviously it wasn't that moment. It was still another year and a half out before we decided that we could get to it. French Canadian wouldn't be the first language that you'd pick off if you were going to figure out which languages you were going to localize for to extend your footprint in this big old world. So the problem wasn't getting paid to do the localization in French Canadian. The problem was that it distracted us from a goal, right? There's an opportunity cost. So that meant we took some finite resources, got it localized in French Canadian, and it took us a little longer to get there. So if there's a big challenge, it's sometimes too much opportunity and having the cojones to say no.
I am so glad you said that. We talk about this a lot in the program, and I'm finding this a lot with the clients that I'm working with, is that they have really good high-performance teams, and you say, cool, so what's your one thing? And they're like, no, I got like 30. And you're like, right. I'm going to ask it again. What's your one thing? Because as you pointed out, just because you can do something doesn't mean you're not distracting from hitting that bigger goal or whatever else. All right, so let's do this then. What was it like getting to that exit? Did you guys, when you guys formed the company and you got started, was the plan to get an exit? Did you say we want acquisition, or was it a, hey, we can start a company and let's go? Like, because I find a lot of people don't have an exit planned. So how did you guys handle that?
All of the above. We were really fortunate, right? So we'd already been in the industry. We knew it intimately. We'd been acquired by Microsoft, and we were at Microsoft long enough to figure out what Microsoft's roadmap was going to be at the time around real-time communication. And we just had a passion that was in a little different space, and thought we had an idea that we could beat them to market with and all that kind of stuff, right? So I think one of the big challenges coming out of that wasn't getting funded. We actually went from nothing to being funded in the process. The big learning was in our definition of what an exit was. So we got $2 million of angel money, but the angel investors actually said, we don't care if we sell. We're like, huh? No, that's what we're doing. We're starting. We got the idea. We got the team. We're ready to go. And they're like, no, think about it a different way. An exit is just your ability to exit. It doesn't mean we have to or want to. But by way of analogy, if you owned a rental property, a rental house that was spinning off $500 a month in cash, every day or every month you would have a choice. Do I want to exit, or do I want to just let it generate some cash? And that was kind of their point. They're like, hey, if we get to this place and we're what that does is buys us choice. So the market, if you back to the house, I own a house and I'm renting it out and making some cash. Well, in the down market, maybe I just keep taking the cash. But the market swings, and now that net present value equation is I make an exit strategy, an exit choice. Really, they said what you want is not an exit, you want a choice. And in it, as it turned out for us, the exit became the thing to do. But
I think
that was very different than we did, because we started literally day one thinking, how do we build the company as a product as well as the product so that we can all, cash in our ducats in 24 months, whatever.
Get to be rich, have the yacht, drink martinis, pinkies up. I got it. But it's interesting, though.
I got an expensive education, so I'm sitting here in my family room instead of on a yacht, but that's another story.
But it's interesting that you talk about that as having a choice, because one of the things we've looked at too is that IPO is not the only route. M&As are on the rise. Private equity acquisition is on the rise, and mergers, which I know is part of M&A, but it's acquisition or merger. There's a lot of different ways that this works. But what's interesting about having that choice then is that one of the other themes we've looked at is focus on profitability, right? Focus on value and build something that's sustainable, and then you have those choices. And if somebody comes along one day, knocks on the door and says, hey guys, I love what you're doing. I think you'd fit great in this portfolio. What do you think? You have the ability to say no because you're not stressed, but you can also move into it because that's kind of useful.
Yeah.
All right. So totally tell me.
Fair, actually, let me point your listeners and viewers to a resource though that I also found very interesting. It was in the last year, Harvard Business Review ran a feature cover story and then the related stories around the economics of scale. And they laid out, including with some very academic arguments, and financial VC kind of arguments, why it makes sense for some companies to go out and get that, 3 million users before they worry about turning a profit. And there is a different set of numbers that is possible now today in the web and the cloud that wasn't available to people before, so that some of the old ways of thinking about VC, which is, hey, it's cash flow positive, and now you're spinning off cash. That was the story we were in 12 years ago. But there are new ways of thinking that could justify I'm going to go drive usage and adoption before I worry about cash flow. might be a way to think about it. If you go back and search the reviews or the articles, archives of Harvard Business Review, you'll find it's a brilliant exposition of something that a lot of people don't understand.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm totally going to check that out. All right. So you did a startup, you got acquired, you did a startup, you exited, and now you're kind of back at a startup that's not a startup brand. So tell us some of that situation, and then what's the same and what's different about it as you've learned. I mean, every time you go through this process, you must, I hope, you get a little smarter with it. So what are some things that you've learned this time around, and how are you digging it?
I am loving it. So, when we did the exit, we started a new company just to be purely in education. That was training seminars, so wrote multiple books, like you said, spoke at TEDx and probably to a few audiences nobody's ever heard of. And then at some point, and now I have the privilege of working for the oldest startup on the planet, which is kind of cool. So an old-time company, a company with legitimate long-time roots in the company, decided to split. And the pro services group, virtual event production, webinars, webcasts, all of the people that do all of the behind-the-scenes production, not unlike you've got a team here today doing the behind-the-scenes production on this.
And they're awesome, by the way.
Well, and so I work with a bunch of people who've been doing this, and we got untold decades of experience between us, and yet it was just a little over a year ago that spun out and kind of became its own independent entity. And along the way, I had content, they didn't have content, and we fell in love with each other and merged entities. So, but what was kind of interesting, or what I learned along the way, is that just because the company's been around for 17 years doesn't necessarily mean everything's in place, right? I said the oldest startup, right? So like we're a year into this and we're doing the same thing you're doing, going, have we outgrown our CRM, or how we're keeping contacts, or managing the pipeline, or we're just figuring stuff out all over again. So if there's one thing that I think it's useful to remember in the multiple times I've been through this, it's that don't go get an elephant gun when a mousetrap will do. Sometimes you just fix the problem now. You don't need Salesforce.com the day you open the day you open the doors. So if there's a key learning this time around, it's figuring out all of the things you don't need. Do we need stationery? No. Hell, we didn't have business cards till a few weeks ago. So
it's funny, me too. I just broke down. Paul and I, my co-host, we talk about this all the time. I just broke down and got business cards. I haven't had them for like 4 or 5 years, and just a couple weeks ago, I got business cards.
We're an all-virtual company. There's 17 of us. Do we need an office? No, actually, we don't need an office.
Right.
So
I mean, especially a company that's working on building events and using Skype for business. If you guys are like, look, we got to be in the same space. This virtual stuff is just a fad. That would be a very mixed message. That would be awkward.
Yeah.
All right. So any last advice for somebody today starting a company? I mean, you've given them some good models on how to think about mapping to the technology, which I think probably extends far beyond just doing anything virtual. But any parting thoughts for somebody today who's in that space, they're listening to us right now, and they want to level up their game? What should they think about? What do you think is the best investment for a founder of a startup today to do better tomorrow?
With regard to virtual presentations, or just in terms of how do I grow professionally?
Let's go with one of each. No pressure.
Come
on, Michael.
Well,
Jordan.
You know what? In general, you cannot talk to people enough. Right? There is nothing that will help you hone a message, figure things out, like getting out there and speaking to the marketplace. And I'm not the only person to say that, but I think presentations is an interesting and good way to do it. And this is where the virtual presentations parts come in. You can do it with a lot quicker if you think in terms of like Agile or Scrum or development methodologies. The ability for you to put something out there, make a presentation to a group of people, even if it's 3, and then get some real-time feedback. That cycle time is so much shorter when you do it online instead of when you do it offline. If it's not just you talking and spouting out content, but it's actually you using the medium to enter into a dialogue in a public arena, the rate at which you will accelerate those fine little nuances that help you hone your message, prioritize your product requirements, or whatever it is that you have to do, I think is pretty powerful. With regard to the virtual, the second piece, the virtual event, I would almost err on the side of not making presentations. I just blogged about taking the idea of an unconference and moving it into an unwebinar or an unclass online, right? Well, what's the idea? It's that it's audience driven, not you driven. So a hybrid of that. I actually just wrapping up a 4-week series for Log Me In doing this, where the presentation is 15 minutes and the Q&A is 45 instead of the other way around.
I love that.
So it's
I'm
a
totally
great way
in.
to listen to the market.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. In fact, I'm going to take you up on that at some point. Maybe we'll do it together even and kind of see where it goes. That's a blast. So, Roger, I thank you so much for joining us. As always, I got some ideas today, and I now have some questions I'm going to go ask you because I've been using some of these tools, and I'm realizing I might not be using them to the best of my ability. So I appreciate that, and I know our listeners appreciate that, as well as some of your startup stories. So thank you for being our guest on episode 36. And right after this, we'll come back and I'll go through some news and some stuff. But there's some fun stuff, including the annual letter from Jeff and some of these other things. So come right back, and I'll be right back here with you.